shook here yet. Oh, we got 3 minutes.
You're live. You're live.
We still got 3 minutes though. Hey Seth. How you doing? In your man cave, huh? What's that?
Just more like a man closet.
In your own room. Currently with one. All right, Chuck said he was going to join us here yet, so we've got a couple of minutes. How's everything down there? Did y'all get any snow?
No snow. Got down into the 20s though. Lots of rain.
Yeah, we got down to like 14 degrees. It's cold here. Just down the gas station, there was a big water puddle just from a dip, and then it froze over last night. So it kind of looks like, from everybody driving through it, looks like snow that's slushed up either which side of the puddle as people were driving through it.
It's funny, wind chill puts it at 12 degrees. Everybody's running around talking about how you gotta keep water running, don't let your pipes freeze.
You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that as long as the water pipes are underneath your house and your house isn't wide open underneath.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid and we lived in a trailer. There were a few times we had to do it. We didn't have the underskirting on the trailer, so it was wide open. There were a few times we had to do it, but everybody that I know of that had a crawl space, I've never heard of anybody needing to run their pipes for that down here, anyways. So, well, it is 7 o'clock. There's Chuck and Barb. Hello. Good evening.
Hi.
Did everybody get? Everybody have your copy of the worksheet?
No, didn't get a chance to print it out, but I got copies of the Bible passages.
Okay.
Just follow along.
Well, you can go if you have the option. You can go to the website and just have it up on your. But I mean, you can pay attention if you want. It's not complicated. But
We'll pay attention.
okay, very good. So we'll start here with prayer this evening. Heavenly Father, you have created all things for us and for our enjoyment. And yet, because of the sin that has entered into your perfect creation, there are many troubles and many struggles that we have to go through. We pray that you would, through the lesson that we study this evening, open our minds more and more to comprehend that you are still watching over us, your children, and that you will not allow the corruption that is in the world or the futility of the world to rob us of that salvation that we have in your Son. So keep us confident of your mercy and your goodness and your love and your forgiveness. In Jesus' name, amen. To introduce this evening's lesson, I want to kind of paint a little bit of a picture in your mind. You can start you start walking side by side with someone, and you may be talking for a little while, and you don't know where they're going, you only know where you're going. So you just keep on going, but eventually it becomes obvious that you're not heading to the same place. How does it become obvious? Well, it becomes obvious because the other person takes a turn that you don't take. So they go a different way. And along the way, they've got all kinds of different paths that they're going to take, and you've got another destination in mind, so you're going down that path. Well, that's kind of the way it is living in the world when you're living with people who have a different, what's called a worldview, than what you have. As a Christian, you have a worldview that is dictated to you by the Bible, and the destination of your path, the destination at the end of your path is heaven. But the destination at the end of the path of those who are not following a biblical worldview, in their mind, is just nothingness, but we know that the end of that path is destruction and hell. And so, with that thought in mind, now picture, what would a person describe, like if they were to write down in a book all the things that they see along their path, it's obviously going to be different than the things that you write down in your book about all the things you see on your path, right? You're going to keep going, and you're going to see this oak tree with squirrels playing in it, but they're going to see a pine tree with a bunch of pine needles on. Why? Because they're not on the same path you're on. They're describing something different. You're going to see a blue house with flowers all over the place. They're going to see a purple house with statues in the yard. And that's what they're going to describe. And that's really what it's like as we come across a lot of these timely topics that we're discussing. That we see things one way, and we're being honest, and they're seeing things another way. Oh, did we lose internet? Are you there, Seth?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
I was just distracted.
Okay, so there's Barb and Chuck. Okay.
Is this Zoom?
Huh?
Is it Zoom?
Google Meet.
That was me.
Okay. Anyways, so it's people that have a different worldview, that have a atheistic, non-biblical worldview. They're being honest when the way they address things in life is just they don't have the right information to deal with these things. Global warming, or better stated these days as climate change, is an example. Because they're dealing from the point of view that this world is all that we ever have, all that we ever will have, and if we don't keep it pristine, it's going to fall apart for future generations. And we take a different point of view on it and say, okay, first of all, this world isn't all that we have. There's more to come in the afterlife, but the one who has planned both is taking care of both. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have any responsibility. Of course, we have some responsibility, but it does alter the way we see things from the way they see things. They're being honest. It's not like they're just intentionally deceiving us, although sometimes they are. But the reality is they have a heartfelt difference of view of the way things are. It's just that their view is wrong. Okay? So with that, we'll start our lesson, introduction. When you hear the term global warming, what are some things that come to mind? What do you think of when you hear that term? And then put in climate change. You know why climate change is now, and it's no longer global warming, because do you know how long it's been since the since the Earth has actually warmed in a single year? You hear about it all the time, but they tend to not use global warming anymore, even though they still mean the same thing. Do you know how long it's been since we've recorded an actual increase in temperature of the Earth? 25 years. It's been 25 years since we've recorded an increase in temperature. Now, are there pockets of where it gets warmed up a little bit more, like it's a hotter summer here than it typically is, but it's colder over here? Yes. And next year it may be hotter over here and colder over here than it was the previous year. That happens. Weather patterns affect the way temperatures. But as far as the average temperature of the Earth, there has not been an increase in the Earth's temperature for 25 years, and still there's all this talk about global warming or climate change, because when it became evident that things weren't getting hotter, you know, the polar ice caps weren't melting at the rate that they said they were, that there would be no longer any polar ice caps by the year 2020. Obviously, they can't keep making that claim, so they had to back away from global warming, and now they call it climate change. So now it's all these other things. But what do you think of when you hear that term, global warming or climate change? Any threats that you hear? Yes, Seth.
One of the reasons they changed it to climate change was because in the 70s they said we were going to have the second ice age. And of course that didn't happen because we were supposed to be under ice by the year 2000. Then they changed it to global warming, and now obviously that's not happening either. So they have to say climate change, that way they can kind of go either way.
Correct. And in fact, both at the same time, right? It's not just either way, it's both at the same time.
Well, whatever they use to draw taxes out of you or get you to fund whatever cause they have. But then to answer your question, what they kind of program in is if you talk about climate change, they want you to think that it's a man-made change.
Right, which we're going to get to. But what about some of the threats that they make? You mentioned a couple of them. We were supposed to be all covered with ice by the year 2000, and of course by the year 2020, the Earth was supposed to be uninhabitable. If you go back to Al Gore's prediction back in the 1990s, by the year 2020, the Earth was going to be uninhabitable. What about some other specific threats, like, you're going to see the ocean level increase to such a degree that whole cities will be wiped out by the year 2015, then it was 2020, then it's 2030, whole cities wiped out. That the Earth's population will suffer so significantly and the only people that are able to continue living will have to live underground. These are all kinds of things that we've heard in connection with global warming, or more recently, climate change. Question, is global warming real?
No, I think it's just junk science.
Okay, Seth says it's junk science. Anybody else have a point of view?
I think that there's some elements of truth to it. It's just that the conclusions that they're drawing from it aren't supported by the information that is out there. I think that we are affecting the climate, but not any more or less than anybody did down through history. Are we doing a little bit more because of the emissions that we've got? Maybe, but not enough to affect things.
Well,
I think that they named Greenland for a reason.
And Iceland for another reason.
Right.
So what you've just touched on, Chuck, is the fact that the climate certainly is changing. And then you touched on another subject. Are we contributing to it or not? And you kind of intimated that, well, we're having some effect, and that's a possibility. Here's a couple of facts. Well, they're mentioned here underneath the facts that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases have increased. 30% carbon dioxide and 30% carbon dioxide equivalents since about the time of the Industrial Revolution. So there is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there used to be. Also, global temperatures have increased 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit during approximately the same period. So you're going all the way back to the mid-1800s. We're in the early 2000s, so you got about 180 years. And from what they've been tracking is, on average, their average is we're 1.2 degrees warmer than we were back in the mid-1800s. Now, there's all kinds of things that go into play in that, right? Like, where all did they track the temperatures back in the mid-1800s? Because they didn't have the ability to get to all the places that we do. I mean, they could, but not quickly. And certainly not quickly enough to take average temperatures like they do right now. So we even use satellites to scan whole areas of the Earth to determine average temperature, like over the equator in the mid-Atlantic. You know, a satellite can scan that and say, here's the average temperature of this area that we're scanning. They didn't have that back in the mid-1800s. So is the world actually increased? Well, the records show an increase. Does that make an actual increase? We don't know. The increase in carbon dioxide is another one. They had a way of testing for carbon dioxide back in the 1800s, but it certainly wasn't as accurate, and it wasn't as all-encompassing as it is now. So we have to be careful that we, Seth mentioned junk science. There is some junk science involved where the numbers are being fabricated or truths are being left out. And at the same time, we got to be careful that we don't go too far the other way and say, well, there's not an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Is there an increase? Well, obviously there's going to be. I think, let's see, back in your teenage years, Barb and Chuck, the population of the Earth was what, 3 billion? 3.5 billion?
We have no idea, but it's definitely not as much as it was now.
Right, and I remember distinctly hearing the number 4.7 billion at some point in my younger years. So we're all the way up to 7.5 billion people. Obviously, there's going to be some increase in things like carbon. The number of vehicles on the road have dramatically increased. Not just here in the United States, but all over the world. It's dramatically increased.
The number of animals in the world, with their gases that they emit.
Well, I don't know if there's more animals or not. I guess I haven't heard that one, but maybe there are. Huh?
I would submit that there's more cows and large animals in farming in the world than there was any time there was in the world. There's emulsions from them that affect the atmosphere more than any cars do.
Well, but the increase in domesticated animals has been offset by the decrease in the wild animals, because as you take over more land for farming and ranching, you reduce the wild population of the animals. So, you know, I don't know what the number is. I haven't heard any specific. Now, I know that a lot of people on the left side of the political spectrum will say we need to reduce the number of cows because that's what's causing global warming. I don't think that assertion takes into account other factors. But that doesn't mean that there's not any. That doesn't mean that there's not any effect at all. So,
Master,
yes, sir.
part of the junk science is that they focus on how much the CO2 emissions have increased in our atmosphere. But what they leave out is that everything has increased in our atmosphere, to include the stuff that counters all that excess CO2. So nothing's really changed in our atmosphere than it has before.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out some more facts on you here. There's a book called 10 Things About Our World That You Should Know But Don't. I think that's the title of it. I heard a YouTube video, it was about a 2.5-hour video, about 2 years ago. And I think that was the name of it. And the guy that was commenting on it talked about like various facts that just kind of boggle your mind. Like, did you know that the whole Sahara Desert is 15% smaller than it was 20 years ago? Which means what? If the desert is smaller, Chuck? Oh, your volume didn't turn on.
I don't know, if it's 18% smaller, what's taking the 18%?
Well, it was 15 was the number, but if it's 15% smaller, what replaced the desert? The answer would be vegetation. The answer is vegetation.
Didn't the Sahara Desert used to be a rainforest?
Well, Jediah touched on another thing. The Sahara Desert used to be a rainforest, and we know that because there's fossils, not just animal fossils, but plant fossils all throughout the...
And some of the largest we've ever found.
Right, some of the largest plant fossils we've ever found. So there's that. But, okay, just in the Western Hemisphere alone, over the past 20 years, you know how they used to talk about the tropical rainforest of the Amazon being wiped out, and we're going to lose oxygen because the trees that are being cut down, that's what provides oxygen. They take CO2 and turn it into oxygen. They release oxygen and they breathe in CO2. Well, in the past 20 years, not only have we not seen a decrease in the number of trees that exist, the foliage larger than 10 feet tall, it's actually the increase in the Western Hemisphere is larger than the size of the state of Texas. Like if you could put all the trees together, it's bigger than the state of Texas in the past 20 years. So we're not losing trees that are able to produce more oxygen and take out CO2. We're actually creating more. Now, that stands to reason, right? If CO2 is increasing and trees survive on CO2, what will trees do?
Increase.
They will flourish. They will increase, thereby producing
Oxygen.
more oxygen. So, there's just a lot that's going on there in these claims that are made that they're not taking into account all kinds of side issues that come into play. And those are just a couple of examples that I remember from that book. Another thing that we have to take into account, we do know that carbon dioxide, CO2, has increased in the atmosphere. in the past 20 years. What we don't know is it because the Earth is warming that there's more CO2, or is it because there's more CO2 that the Earth is warming? In other words, as the sun heats the surface of the Earth, the oceans themselves release CO2. And they actually release far more than we're even capable of producing. So there's one thing. Now, if you are of a certain mindset, if you follow a certain mindset, you're probably going to say no. It's probably we're producing more CO2. That's why it feels warmer. If you're of another mindset, you're going to say, well, it's warming, and that's why more CO2 is coming out of the Earth. Another thing to take into account is it's obvious not just from the handwritten records, but also from geological studies that the Earth has gone through. They have like 5 different waves of temperature variations. Some come in the thousands of years. Some come in the 500s of years. Some come in the hundreds of years. Some come in the decades, and some even come in the years. So, and you can look at it when you see it. There is an actual pattern to them, and it looks very much like a wave. When you take the information and reduce it into a graph, it looks very much like sound waves. It's going up and down and up and down in a very regular pattern. So much so that that some people are saying not only are we not warming, we are just on the verge of hitting a significant cooling period. Whether that comes about or not, I have no idea. But if you follow the wave patterns, then that's probably going to be the case. Anyways, all of this is information that goes into this. The key issues in dispute on page 12 there, or the second page, how much global warming has been caused by humans? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. Advocates of global warming ideology will say all of it, almost all of it. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. But those who are skeptical of the global warming or climate change will say less than half at most, none, that natural consequences create more of the issues, like volcano eruptions. Well, there was one a few years ago. A volcano erupted, and they said the amount of CO2 that came from that one volcano eruption was more than the last 5 years combined that man has produced. That's a lot.
Also, when you talked about the ocean producing CO2, that reminded me of something. I saw that kelp apparently produces like half as much oxygen as the trees on the planet does.
Right. Yeah, the kelp in the ocean produces a lot of oxygen. Yep.
Astor,
Yes.
can they quantitatively measure that?
I'm sorry?
Can they quantitatively measure how much CO2 has been put out by humans?
They can. What they do is they attempt to figure out an average. It's kind of like trying to figure out what is the poverty line, and you can figure out a poverty line for a city, a state, or a nation. But when you try to figure out a poverty line over the whole earth, it becomes real difficult. And then you have these wide. The bigger the area that you're talking about, the wider the variations become. It's kind of like my dad being on the scaffolding when I was a kid, standing down below. He's 8 levels up on the scaffolding, and I'm waiting down there to get him a tool or something. Well, if I happen to bump the bottom of the scaffolding right next to me, it moves like 1/8 of an inch. Up there where he's standing, 8 levels up, you know, it might be 6 or 8 inches that I just made him move. And that's the way these things go. The more, when you stay on a smaller level, it seems like a real accurate number, but the wider you get, the further out you get to a wider number of people, the greater the variation is in the guesses. So they have an idea of what they think human contribution is, but it's hard to not say this, but almost always those who are on the wide end of, or on the high end of what man contributes to CO2, let me say this, there is a correlation between one's politics and one's conclusion as to how much man is contributing. The more liberal, progressive you tend to be, the higher the contribution of man to global warming you tend to believe. And conversely, the other way. The more politically conservative you tend to be, the lower the contribution of man you tend to believe to global warming, climate change. Yes?
I don't believe it's necessarily lower. I just believe we're more conservatives tend to be more in the state of mind of God will take care of us.
Well, that's a whole nother subject, because not everybody that's politically conservative is a Christian. And that is another subject, but you're right on what you're saying.
Majority.
That's where we're going to end up with this lesson, but that's not where we're at right now. Okay? So I agree with your conclusion, but there's more to it than that. Anyhow, number 2, will these trends continue? The advocates of global warming, climate change say not only are they going to continue, they're going to keep getting worse and worse and worse unless we do something. Now here's the thing, what's the something we're going to do? Less what? Because are we doing less? They've been hounding us about this for 35 years that I know of, since the scare of the Ice Age, the impending Ice Age. I mean, it almost immediately flipped to global warming. And for 35 years, we got to do something, we got to do something, we got to do something. What is the only thing that we can see that has actually been done? Do you know? Well, that's true. Sandra says more confusion. That's true. There is more confusion. The only thing I can discern that's been done is more taxes, higher regulations and taxes on all kinds of things. But are there fewer cars? Are there fewer houses being built?
In fact, there's more car companies building more types of cars.
There's more car companies building more types of cars and building more of them.
Right.
Right? There's more power plants. There's more coal being mined, even though we're supposedly trying to get away from coal. We still have a lot of it being mined. Maybe not in certain areas of the world, but in the world in general. More oil is being pumped. More oil is being refined into gasoline. More planes are in the skies. More satellites are being hoisted up into the atmosphere to help us with all kinds of communications. We're not doing anything less. We're doing everything more and more and more. Question is, what can be done? And the answer is, we don't even know. If there is anything that can be done, if there's even anything that needs to be done. What we do know is the more and more you mess with energy, if you try and reduce it, it doesn't help people, it hurts people. And that's supposed to be the whole point of the global warming thing, right? We're supposed to be saving humanity, except it's the present humanity that we're hurting in the process. So anyways, keep that in mind. What will happen if they do continue? According to many people, the ice caps will melt, the cities will flood, especially the coastline cities. Hey, is there any truth to that? That coastline cities can flood and maybe even be so flooded that they'll never exist again? You know, we find them all the time.
Are you asking me, can that happen?
Can that happen?
Yeah.
We find them all the time. We find cities that are 60 feet off of a coastline, submerged underneath. Not just 60, further than that. Like I read of one recently down in the in northern off of Central America, out into the what would be kind of the Gulf region. A whole city underneath water, like underneath 120 feet of water. And you can see the sonar, and sure enough, it's like houses and everything from, who knows how long ago, 500 years, 1,000 years ago. There are cities that are underneath water that we know of all around the world. So it does happen. Question is, why did those ones happen, and is it likely to happen now? Do we have enough ice out of the water right now that if it goes into the water or melts into water, it raises the ocean that much? Well, there's all kinds of speculation with that. Al Gore predicted that if the solar ice caps were to melt, the surface of the oceans would rise between 20 and 30 feet. Now, that's enough to put almost every city in the United States that's on a coast underwater permanently. And not only that, it would take up about a fifth of the U.S. landmass. Now, if you do that across the whole world, well, that's a lot of land and a lot of people gone suddenly. Except it doesn't happen suddenly; it happens slowly. But that's on the high end. There's others who look at that same exact information, that if all the ice caps melt and became part of the oceans, then the rise would be around 15 to 16 inches. Well, would that be devastating? Well, it still would do a lot of damage, but not nearly as much, because there's some cities, you can think of New Orleans. Charleston, South Carolina is the city with the lowest seaport in the nation, and it's like 6 feet below sea level. How that can be, I don't know. I don't understand how that is, but
wait, the city's 6 feet below the sea level?
The city is 6 feet below sea level, even though it's right there close to the sea. It's kind of weird. Anyhow, all this stuff there's so much information flowing this way, and it's all interconnected somehow, and some of it is just wrong information, and some of it's right information. You're trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong. But the one thing that's not being taken into account in all of this is now the point that Jediah is talking about. Wait a minute, and this is where we go back to how I started with, you're walking down a path with another person, and at some point you can tell your destination's not the same because that person takes a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn, whichever way, and you've got to keep going straight. And the straight path there is to take into account, wait a minute, there's someone else in control of all of this in a way that is far superior to any input, control, or contribution we have to it. And that, of course, is God. So the question is, what does the Bible say about climate change? Reading Genesis 1, 6 through 8, And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. He's talking about the sky there. Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. In other words, when you look at the sky, you can see, okay, somebody else greater than me is in control of all of this. And that's God. So that's the question. Where did the Earth's atmosphere come from? Well, the Bible clearly says God's the one that created it. He did it on day 2 of creation. Now, that's an important point, because if you're talking to someone without a biblical worldview, what's going to be their version of where the atmosphere came from?
Big Bang.
A giant explosion that started off super hot, and it took millions and even billions of years for it to cool down to a level that life could evolve. And that's what they're afraid of, is that we're going to cause it to get back above that level where life can even exist.
Had to cool down, but stopped at that exact temperature. And we're scared of these half degrees moving.
Well, you can say that, but you got to remember, they're dealing in terms of billions of years. We're dealing in terms of 6,000 years.
Even then,
Maybe
they still say life's been around for billions of years.
Well, not billions, millions. Life has been around for millions, well, maybe billions. The first plant life, or the first cell life. I don't know what they say that is now. The universe from the Big Bang is like, what was the latest number I saw? 120 billion is the latest number I think I've seen.
That sounds pretty
Chuck's going to look it up for us.
Don't wait. Keep talking.
Okay. But anyways, just keep in mind, from their perspective, all of this time, anything's possible. Right? And we're dealing in such a narrow amount of time that we can't perceive what in the world are you even concerned about.
Right.
You know what I mean? But they're dealing with this out of control universe mentality, that everything is always hanging in the balance. From the moment the explosion, the Big Bang happened, everything's hanging in the balance.
A world without a creator.
A world without chaos. Yeah, I suppose that's the right way to think of it. They believe that chaos is our creator, and chaos continues. That's the right way to look at it, I suppose. They have a creator, it's just chaos is their creator. And he has to use billions and billions of years to create it.
Well, if they're thinking that the Big Bang Theory is how we started, what's going to stop us from taking us away? Taking them away.
Right, yes.
13.8 billion
Since life evolved or started,
since the Big Bang.
since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion. Really, that's it? Because I've heard much bigger numbers than that. But okay, I'll take Google's word for it.
Well, Sam, there's an error of 21 million, one way or the other.
Okay, 21 million. Okay, that's not very much. Anyhow, so from the rest of the creation account, what can we assume about the composition of the Earth's atmosphere at creation? So there's the thing we're dealing with is far different than those who do not have a biblical worldview too, right? We assume, because creation only took 6 days, and within that 6 days, the atmosphere had to be perfect for plant life, animal life, human life, infinitesimally small biological life like viruses and bacteria, all of those things, every kind of insect, the atmosphere had to be usable for all of those things, all of those parts of creation, right? Not so for those who follow an atheistic worldview, that the atmosphere had to slowly change into an atmosphere that could support various kinds of life. What's up, Jediah?
I'm just doing more research on the Big Bang thing.
So we believe that the atmosphere, as it was created, has always been able to support life. The atheistic worldview says, nope, it's only this little tiny narrow window that life has been able to be supported. So how does an evolutionary worldview impact a person's view of global warming? Well, they really have to live in a terrified state, ultimately, right? And that's what they're feeding us. Now, we tend to think, oh, they're just trying to gin us up into terror, but I think they're in terror. And I have scriptural support of that, because the psalmist says, there they are in great fear where no fear needs to be. And they are. They're in constant fear that somewhere down the line, none of this is going to exist anymore. Anyhow. Now, I don't necessarily mean the politicians. I think politicians are just, they know how to gin up support. And one of the easiest tactics to gin up support is, the two main tactics to gin up political support, you know what they are? And this predates the United States. Fear, on the one hand, fear, right, that you're going to die, you're going to starve to death, you're going to be conquered by invading armies, you're going to have the atmosphere burn up all around you and kill you and your children. Fear. The other one is, the other attack, Chuck? Money. The other one is, here's how you get support. We're going to take care of you. We're going to provide for you. That's the two great motivating factors for political support. Okay, going on to the second part, Genesis 1:26 through 29, I'll read that. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. So what role did God give him? Go ahead, Chuck. 15-minute warning. Oh, man. Okay. What role did God give mankind at creation?
To rule over it.
Yeah, to rule over the earth, right? So with that comes a bit of responsibility, correct? And I think that's fair to say. There's nothing about the Christian or the biblical worldview that gives man an excuse to mistreat creation, for example. Unfortunately, I remember when I grew up down south here, and you still see remnants of it, especially all down Center Hill Church Road, that was perfectly acceptable to drive down the road and throw your garbage. You know, if you stopped at McDonald's, you got done eating, throw it out the window. That's not really in keeping with biblical principles. That's not subduing the earth and ruling over it. That's abusing it, right? So we want to be careful of that, most certainly. That doesn't mean that we are the gods of creation and that we are able to make it better or make it less. So that's kind of questions 4 and 5 together. We should take care of what God has provided us. Next page, for what purpose did God create plants? That's question number 6.
So many different purposes.
Well, the main one.
Carbon dioxide,
Say again?
they created plants to eat carbon dioxide.
Well, according to the passage I just read from Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 29, it's food. We're supposed to eat it.
Yeah, I know.
But they do create, they eat carbon dioxide, and not just eat. I mean, they literally eat. Did you know that? I don't know if I told you guys this, but I was doing some research a couple weeks ago. Came across an article that talked about plants, and did you know that every plant that has a leaf on it, on the underside of those leaves, if you could blow up and look at it with a microscope, they have little things, little openings that actually open up that they call stoma, and that's the Greek word for mouth. They have little mouths, and you know what those mouths do? They suck in carbon dioxide. And here's a really interesting point about it. You know when the birds start chirping way early in the morning, like you're still wanting to sleep and it's 4:30?
I learned this in friendly biology.
When the birds start chirping at 4:30 in the morning, it wakes up the leaves, the mouths start opening up. So, isn't that amazing? Because what good would it do the trees in the middle of the night when there's no sunlight? Because remember, they need the sunlight to turn that carbon dioxide into food. And without the sunlight, they may as well go to sleep. And they do sleep until the birds chirp, and the birds are their wake-up alarm so that they start opening their mouths and eating. Now, to me, that's just huge evidence for the existence of God. That's wise there. But to the non-biblical worldview atheists, that's all accident. That's just the way it evolved. Anyhow, how would an evolutionary, I kind of already touched on that. I don't have much time, so I'm not staying on all of these. Genesis 3:17 through 19. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you are taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So what is true of our world ever since the fall into sin? It's been cursed. Right? And that phrase, thorns and thistles, we tend to think of a very specific kind of plants, right? The ones that have little pokey things. But that's, in the Hebrew language, it's not just little pokey things. It's everything, the plants that themselves grow. You ever pick tomatoes? What happens? You get itchy because they have little fibers that poke into you. How about cotton? You ever pick cotton? Did you know when it's time to pick cotton, the leaves on it, they get really sharp where the seed was there and it pops open? Well, all those holes on the seed are there, and they will shred your hand. Now, the first one you pick, no big deal. We'll kind of do that all day, every day for a harvest season. You get cut up really bad picking cotton. And it's true of almost every plant that we farm for food. The plants themselves bear thorns and thistles. And then in the cases where they're not necessarily thorns and thistles, sometimes they're oils, like poison ivy, like mushrooms that have all kinds of toxins that are carried in oils. So don't think of just thorns and thistles. That's not all God's talking about here. He's talking about every painful, every adverse effect that vegetation brings upon us. That was all part of the curse. But it also applies to the rest of creation. How do we know? Because if you turn the page of the Bible passage, I put another Bible passage in there from Romans 8, verses 19 through 22. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that the creation will itself be set free from its bondage to corruption, and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. So here's the point of this lesson, that God himself brought about all these things that we tend to think are all man-made, and in a sense, I guess we can kind of now say that they are, because man is the one that brought sin into the world, and this Bible passage says that God did it for man's sake, essentially, because of man, but not in the way that the non-biblical worldview, atheistic, climate change alarmists say. They say we're doing it actively all the time, and the Bible is saying, look, God did this a long time ago. And no, things are never going to be right in this creation as long as there's sin. But the day will come when all these harmful effects of sin will be gone. And so that brings us to Genesis 8:22, where God says this. This is after the flood. Now, this is not part of the promise when he sent the rainbow, so don't think of it there. That doesn't come until chapter 9. But he does make this promise coming out when Noah and his sons are coming out of the ark. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. That's far different than what the climate alarmists say, right? They say it will all cease. That the time's going to come when we can't grow food. The time's going to come when we can't even live. And we have a different perspective. We have the perspective of the one who is in control of all this has made a promise to all of humanity, not just to Christians, but to all of humanity, that he will sustain the seasons for growing food. That he won't bring about this disaster that wipes out all of humanity. Jediah says, never mind. So that's putting into my own words God's promise to Noah. Number 10, number 11, how does this affect the Christian's perspective on global warming? Well, I think how it affects us is, okay, maybe there's some contribution that we have to global warming, to the CO levels rising. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I can read all I can read. I know that politicians use things like this to their own advantage. I know that numbers and data can be manipulated to try and manipulate populations. I wouldn't be surprised if there are ramifications of sin that are felt in the atmosphere because of the fall into sin, but I have a confidence higher than the confidence of the atheist. The confidence of the atheist is it's only a short window of time that the human that life itself has to exist. It's not just the human race. I mean, the climate alarmists think life itself hangs in the balance. And I don't have that fear because God made a promise here. And not only has he made that promise, he's also made the promise of eternal life to all who believe in his Son. I got 4 minutes, so I'm going to close by just getting to the last bit about the part with the Pope's declaration. I don't know if any of you looked at that or read it. Pope, as the Roman Catholic papacy likes to do, puts his nose into political and socio-economic issues, and then tries to distort it with a bit of a religious idea. So he got into the global warming, climate change, and he tied it all into to Christianity, and he made a lot of assumptions and a lot of assertions in keeping with Roman Catholic theology, which is all about work righteousness. He talked about we got to apply the gospel to this situation. To him, the gospel is works. We got to go and do more, do good to help more people. That's not the gospel. The gospel is God's the one that saves us. And he's already brought us that salvation in his son, and he promises that the world won't end until his son returns. So we have that confidence. Questions or comments? We got 3 minutes. Seth, you've been quiet for a while.
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Comments?
We're okay up here.
All right.
Everything's good.
Okay, well, so the main point is, don't let politicians and scientists get you all worried or stressed out. Live your life, live it responsibly, taking care of the things God has given you to take care of. But you know what? The one thing he hasn't given you to take care of, personally, is whether or not the world can continue to exist. That's in his hands, not ours. Stay within your pay grade. Trust God to be God. All right, we'll close with prayer. Lord Jesus, through you all things are made, and by your word of power you uphold all things. We thank you for doing this for us, even though we have not deserved any goodness or kindness from you. But we especially thank you for that life and that salvation that we have now in your name through your suffering and death on the cross and your rising back to life. Keep us mindful that you're always in control and that you rule all things in heaven and on earth for the good of your church. Amen. All right, so we'll see you on Sunday, God willing.
One or the other.
All right. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, Seth.